So today we're going to be starting by looking at how to convert fractions to decimals and back again.
Oh, back again. Oh, don't you got to just do the...
Well, yeah, so this first one, when we're converting any rational number just means a fraction.
I divided by 8, right?
That's an example of a rational number, yes. But to convert it to a decimal, yes, you do what we did yesterday where you just do the division. But you don't have to do the math enter, because we want our final answer to be a decimal. So just use your calculator and type in the division. Yeah, there. Oh. So you would just type in your calculator 5 divided by 8. Hit enter, write down the decimal. So 5/8 as a decimal is what? 0.625. What's 7/11ths? 0.6333 repeating, which would round to 0.63. Because remember, if it's 5 or more, that's when you round up. What about 7/28ths? 0.25. All right. Any questions on that? So you just got to make sure that if I'm asking for a decimal, leave it as a decimal. If I was asking for the improper fraction, like what we did yesterday, that's when you would have to hit the math enter. Or if we wanted to reduce it, you have to hit math enter to get the fraction. But if I want the decimal, you can just leave it as a decimal. There are two types of decimals. The first is a terminating decimal. This is a decimal that stops, so like the 0.625 or the 0.25, there is a finite number of digits. So terminating decimal is a decimal that stops. So again, like 0.625 or 0.25. Whereas a repeating decimal, as the name suggests, is a decimal that repeats. So like the 0.63 repeating. And so remember, we have this line above. Whatever the digits are that are repeating, you put that line over them to indicate that, because I don't expect you to write 3 repeating multiple times. Just write it once with the line on top. All right, converting a terminating decimal to a rational number. For some of them, you can use the math enter button. So type in the decimal, hit math enter, and it will give you a fraction. However, some of the decimals that we're going to look at would give you too small of a fraction that your calculator doesn't believe you actually want that, and it would just keep it as a decimal. So you do have to know how to convert a decimal to a fraction without the calculator's help, because sometimes the calculator gets lazy and it doesn't want to do it. So to convert a terminating decimal, so one of the decimals that ends, to a rational number, we have to use place values. So we have our decimal point. The first place value to the right of the decimal point is the tenths, and then the hundredths, then the thousandths, then the 10,000ths, and it just keeps on going. You just keep adding zeros as you go. And so to express decimals as rational numbers using these place values, whatever the digits are after the decimal point, that's going to be your numerator. And then based on the place value where those digits end, that's going to be how you figure out your denominator. So like example 2a, we have 0.7, and 7 is in the tenths place value. So our fraction would be 7 over 10. And so 0.49, 49 would be our numerator. What place value does that 0.49 end in? The hundredths, so 100 is our denominator. And then letter C. So 0007, you don't have to write all of those zeros in the numerator because it's still just going to be 7. But what place value does this decimal end in? Yeah, so this is the 10, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. So you'd have 10,000ths. This would be one of the examples where your calculator wouldn't convert that to a fraction because that's too small for the calculator to want to deal with. So this is why you do have to understand the place values. However, you can check it. If you do 7 divided by 10,000 in your calculator, it should give you 0.0007. So you check it backwards once you have an idea of what your answer should be. But sometimes the decimals are going to be too small. Your calculator won't convert them to fractions. Okay, any questions on that, how to do the terminating decimals as rational numbers? Okay. Now we're going to look at how to convert repeating decimals to rational numbers. This one can get a little bit confusing, so stick with me here. So we are going to still be using place values, but we're going to be using them a little bit differently. We're going to use the same place values, or the same place value concept as we did with the terminating decimals. But we're going to use all 9s instead of like the tens and hundreds and thousands. We're going to put all 9s. And to make it even more confusing, it's always going to be one less digit than we would have done. This is kind of weird again to write out in words, but once we start doing examples, it won't be too bad. So, for example, if we had the repeating decimal, like 0.67 repeating, so both that 6 and the 7 are repeating, you would still take whatever that repeating part is, so in this case 67, that would still be your numerator. And now what place value does that 67 end in? The hundredths. This is the hundredths. How many zeros are in 100? 2. That means you would put 2 9s as your denominator. So we have 1, 2, 2 zeros. So put 2 9s in denominator, meaning 99. Okay. So it's just a little bit different. We're using 9s. It's going to be one less value, but if you just count however many zeros are in that place value, that's going to be the number of 9s that should go in your denominator. So let's take a look at on the next page, example 3a. So we have 50.53 repeating. So what's going to be my numerator? 53. Yeah, whatever that repeating thing is going to always be your numerator still. that stays the same. Now for the denominator, where does that repeating decimal, what place value is it ending in? The hundredths again. How many zeros are in 100? 2, so you put 2 nines in the denominator. Again, this is in the hundredths. We have 2 zeros, so we have 2 nines. Okay. Do you guys have any questions? Can you guys try B and C real quick? So writing these repeating decimals as fractions. All right, so letter B, what should my fraction look like for this repeating decimal? 3 over 9. Can that be reduced at all? Yeah, to 1/3. So you gotta be careful of that. So you can always double check, remember, if your fractions can be reduced, right? If you just type in 3 divided by 9, enter, and then do your math enter key, your calculator will do it for you. So it takes about 10 seconds to double check if anything can be reduced. Just gotta be careful of that, because if I ask to express it in reduced form, you gotta make sure you reduce it if it can be reduced. All right, what about letter C? What should my fraction be? Yeah, 637 over 999. Can that be reduced? No. All right. Guys have any questions? So this is the repeating decimal one. This is where you can't really use your calculator. It's not much help. You can use it to check, but you can't use it to figure out what the fraction's going to be. So you have to use your place value. All right. Then moving on. Now we're going to look at how to multiply and divide fractions. So we're going to start with multiplying. So first things first, sometimes when we're multiplying, we're going to end up, or we might have to multiply mixed numbers. Before we can do any multiplication, we have to get all of our terms that we're multiplying, they all have to be in fraction form, meaning we have to convert any mixed numbers to improper fractions. That's going to be our first step. So convert any mixed numbers to improper fractions. So we should only have terms that have just one numerator and a denominator. We shouldn't have that integer out in front. Once we do that, once everything is just in a plain old fraction form, then to multiply, we just multiply straight across. So the numerators get multiplied, that's your new numerator. Denominators get multiplied, that's your new denominator. And then finally, we got to check to make sure that we can't reduce if possible. So reduce if possible. And again, that's easy to check on your calculator just using that math enter button. All right, so let's do an example. Example 4a. So again, with multiplying, we don't have to find any common denominators or anything. That's going to be tomorrow when we do adding and subtracting. Multiplying and dividing is pretty straightforward. So letter A, do we have any mixed numbers that we have to deal with? Nope, they're all already in fraction form, so we can go right to step 2, which is where we just multiply straight across. So we'll have our numerators being multiplied together, so 3 times 5, and we'll have our denominators being multiplied together, so 8 times 11. And we do that multiplication. We get 15 over 88. And then always check if it can be reduced. So in your calculators, again, 15 divided by 88, enter, and then math, enter. And can it be reduced? Yes, no? No. So that would be your final answer. Always check. Okay, so that one's pretty straightforward because we didn't have to do any converting. Let's take a look at letter B. So now both of our terms are mixed numbers, so we have to convert both of those to improper fractions. That's what we did yesterday. Again, you can use whatever method you want. How I taught you yesterday how to use the calculator is just to type this in your calculator as a sum. So you could do 3 plus 2 divided by 3, and then you would do 1 plus 1 divided by 4. Just do them separately just to get their improper fractions, and then do the math, enter, enter. So what is 3 2/3 as an improper fraction? 11 over 3. And what about 1 1/4? 5 over 4. Any questions on how to get those improper fractions? That's what we did yesterday. Okay. So now they're both in fraction form, plain old fraction form, so we can do our multiplication just straight across. So 11 times 5 and 3 times 4. So that should give us 55 over 12. When we get to this point, this is where you have to read directions carefully. If I ask you to convert any improper fractions back to mixed numbers, then you have to make sure you do so. If I don't specify, then you can just leave it. So it kind of just depends on the direction. So right here, all I said was just to reduce. I didn't say anything about converting any improper fractions to mixed numbers at the end. So for this problem, you could just leave it as 55 over 12. You just gotta make sure you're reading the directions carefully. But can this be reduced? How could you check? 55 divided by 12, math, enter, enter. No. So that would be our final answer. Okay. Can you guys try letter C? So again, you have to convert that mixed number to an improper fraction. And remember how we dealt with the negative. You have to have that parenthesis with the negative on the outside when you're converting that mixed number to an improper fraction. So go ahead and try letter C on your own. So you should have ended up, before you did the multiplication, negative 13 over 9 times 5 over 1. Whenever you just have an integer like that, it's always that implied over 1. You don't have to write the over 1 if you don't want to, as long as you realize that the 5 goes with the numerator when you're multiplying. When you multiply straight across, you have to make sure that you only deal with the negative in either the numerator or the denominator. It doesn't really matter which one you go with, but you can't use it twice, because if you did the negative in the numerator and the denominator, your final answer would end up being positive, which doesn't make any sense because it's a negative times a positive. So I like to just deal with it in the numerator, just the first thing that I do. So I treat this as a negative 13 times 5. And what did that give us? I don't want to do it in my head. What's negative 13 times? Thank you. Negative 65 divided by, and then you do 9 times 1 divided by 9. And again, I don't say that you have to convert any improper fractions to mixed numbers, so it's okay to leave it like this. It's also, if it was on a multiple choice test and all of your answers were mixed numbers, then hopefully that would be a clue to you that you have to convert it back to a mixed number. But again, just reading the directions will help. Okay. Questions about multiplying? So the big thing you just got to remember is you have to convert mixed numbers to improper fractions before you can do the multiplying. All right. So let's talk about dividing. Multiplying was pretty simple, and so with dividing, we just have to do one little extra thing, and then it's just going to be as easy as multiplying was. So the first thing we want to do is still convert any mixed numbers to improper fractions. Okay, it should always be the first thing that you do. The second thing, Do you guys remember what to do when we're dividing fractions?
Change flip.
Yeah, same, keep change flip, same change flip. I've heard flip the guy and multiply. However you learned it, you keep the first fraction the same. So same. You change the division sign to multiplication. So you change division to multiplication. And then you flip your second fraction. Then you just multiply. So it becomes a multiplication problem. Since multiplication was so easy, we want to do it again. And then, as always, your last step should be to reduce if possible, or if I want improper fractions changed to mixed numbers, you got to make sure you do that as well. Reduce if possible. Okay, so with example 4a, we don't have any mixed numbers that we have to deal with, so we can go right to step number 2. So we keep our first fraction the same, so 4/5. We change our division sign to a multiplication sign, and then we flip our second fraction. So instead of having 1/10, we're going to have 10/1. And then from there, now it's just a multiplication problem, which we know how to do. So you just go straight across. Gives you 40/5. And can that be reduced? Yeah. Yeah, it's just 8. You could write it as 8. You could write it as 8/1 if you want to have that over 1. Personal preference. I just like to write 8 because it looks cleaner. But whatever you want to do. They're not always going to work out to nice, beautiful numbers, but this one happened too. All right. Letter B. Can you guys try B and C, actually? So again, both of those have mixed numbers, so make sure you convert them to improper fractions first before you do any of the same change flip stuff. So when you're doing these, when you have to do the convert any mixed numbers to improper fractions, you got to make sure that you still remember that you still have to flip the second fraction. A lot of people, sometimes they do the converting and they're like, cool, I just did some work, I did something, that means I must be ready to multiply. But you got to make sure that even though you did convert that mixed number to the improper fraction, you still then, after that, have to do the same change flip before you can do any multiplying. Okay, so you should have had 19/8 for letter B. Are we all good there? Yeah? What did we get for letter C? Yeah, negative, right? 119/36. Everybody have the negative? Okay, good. All right, do you guys have any questions for me?